Welcome, I'm Hernan Murdoch. In this episode, we're going to take a look at written communications. So, as internal auditors spend that much time preparing written communications, in particular the reports, we would like to get a deeper look into what goes into these documents and how we prepare them, and maybe answer the who, what, when, where, how kind of a thing about them. So, to help us with this, Kathleen Crawford, who has a lot of experience in this regard, she's accompanying us. So, welcome, Kathleen.
Hi, Hernan.
So, as relates to written communications, in particular the report, why do we put that much effort into it? I would imagine that part of it is because this is like the product, right?
hmm
But can you tell us more about why we issue written communications?
Yes, you're absolutely right. This is our final product. It's the outward facing product. We have an inward facing one in the form of work papers, but this matters most of all. It caps everything off. So we write audit reports in order to meet IIA standards on communicating engagement results. These are standards that folks would have seen elsewhere. I also like to point out that the audit starts out with a need to answer three fundamental questions, and that's what the audit report is intended to do, is to bring those answers in focus. So we're asking whether or not systems, policies, procedures, operations are working as management intends them to work. So are things
Mhm.
operating as management believes and intends? That's the fundamental question that every audit is going to ask. The second one is if not, so if we find something that is out of balance, out of line, unexpected, why? Why aren't things working as intended? And in discussing how we develop issues and observations, we talked about this at some length. And then finally, if not, so what? We really need to use this last question to take a beat and make sure that we're not reporting issues that are not consequential enough to deserve to be in an audit report. So I use this last one in particular to kind of put my editor's hat on and say, does this deserve to be in an audit report, or could it be communicated through other means and not clutter up the audit report with something that's less consequential?
And
And
it's
it,
important for internal auditors to remember that the audit report is distributed to the individuals that you worked with closely during that engagement,
mhm,
but more often than not, they go all the way up to the board.
right.
So board members want to receive a document that is going to contain matters that are going to be relevant to them as well. So that's an important reason as well. So when we say so what and so on, that's a very important test of your own work to
Mhm.
make sure that you're talking about meaningful things that are really going to capture their attention and compel action.
And I'd like to bring that point that you just made into the point of relationship. Um, Our clients know very well that audit reports go up to senior leadership and to members of the board of directors or board of trustees, and they are not going to look too kindly on us cluttering up the report with inconsequential things. They may feel that it is intentionally meant to embarrass them, and that is not a good look for us if we say that we're trusted business advisors and we're trying to work in partnership with them. So I would argue, a different reason, but the same situation. Let's not add things to the audit report that don't belong there. And
Right.
in the end, it's important that we have this report so that we can provide good information to stakeholders who need it, so that they can make decisions and take actions appropriately. So
Fine.
those are
Very
big
good.
reasons and all important.
Excellent.
So, if we think about what an audit report typically looks like or typically contains, it's likely that you'll see an executive summary. This is the section that highlights significant issues in abbreviated form. So many very busy senior executives who don't have direct contact on this area might look to the executive summary first and then decide for themselves whether or not they're going to do a deeper dive. There's likely to be a background section. This will give, again in brief, the type of audit performed, what was audited, and details only necessary to provide context. There may or may not be reference to previous audits, but there'll be something in there about relevant information to clarify what the area does and what its significance is to the organization.
In some cases, this is going to include volume of transactions, number of employees, amount of revenue generated, when it was acquired, those kinds of indicators as to why we reviewed this. And this points back to the risk assessment that was done at the beginning of the cycle with the annual plan, looking at what we're going to review. So here, some of that is going to be captured again to provide the reader with context as to whether we reviewed it because it is a very important operation, because there are significant deficiencies that we're concerned about. There's a huge initiative we want to make sure we review to make sure everything is in order. Those dynamics are going to help to provide the context for the readers.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that is definitely a balance that we want to strike for the benefit of a bunch of different stakeholders. And then we get into the specific purpose, objective, and scope of this audit. These sections are going to echo themes from the engagement letter and throughout fieldwork. But what auditors should be mindful of is that we're not going to reproduce the engagement letter here in total. That time has passed, but a good summary, a couple of summary statements about thematic connections to our rationale for doing this audit can be meaningful, but it should not be, we should not belabor the point. And the results is where, go ahead.
It may also include the audit team, right? It may mention who were the team members and who was the in charge and so on. So that those elements from the engagement letter will be reflected in that section of the report as well. So what goes into the results?
Well, the results are going to be all sorts of observations, conclusions, and corrective actions. Some audit reports, in fact, will separate things out in terms of these are the issues, these are the conclusions around these issues. Corrective actions will definitely be included. Sometimes you'll see suggestions for improvement. So it depends on the culture of the organization, how far down the road of improvement suggestions they might want to go. This would be an area, for example, that might not deserve to be in the audit report. So you have to be really judicious about that.
One of the ways that we used to work our way through it was to think of the results section encompassing a lot of the CCCER elements, criteria, condition, cause, effects, and corrective actions or recommendations. And then the executive summary was just the condition and the corrective action. So if an executive was going to take a look at a section of the report, the main thing will be, okay, what was the problem and what is going to be done about it? And then in a more detailed section will then capture all the detail around it as well. So as far as the report, so once we look at the structure, like what we just described, what happens now in terms of the when this document is published?
Well, ideally, it should go out as timely as we can make it. So to make it more timely, you and I both know that that audit reports after fieldwork closes can sometimes languish through the editing process and feel like they're no longer important or meaningful. So anything that we can do to make sure that this gets out as quickly as possible, maintaining the accuracy and the compelling argument for change. So let's set some expectations before the audit begins. There may well be some sections of the audit report that are what some people call pro forma. So the background section, there's probably not going to be a lot of change in terms of what our objectives were, what our approach was. So why not cut and paste something into the audit report sooner rather than wait until the last gun is fired before we put that in there. So let's set these expectations. Let's try to write what can be written as we go along, issue those findings throughout the audit, gain some agreement, get them into the audit report so that the draft is living and breathing and developing as we go along. That relates to communicating persuasively and frequently. We need to get people accustomed to the fact, yes, there's an audit report, it's coming. Let's talk about what we see as something that needs to change, and let's talk about that. On the auditor's shoulders, though, is the responsibility for shortening the report, improving writing skills, reducing levels of review. There's something funny that happens in some audit organizations where every level of management seems to feel like he or she has to get their fingerprints on the audit report. So can we agree that that's not necessary? If we improve people's writing skills and create a template that is easy to use, I think that we could go a long way to solving some of these challenges. There are, in fact, there are alternatives to the traditional audit report. There are some folks out there that are doing PowerPoint presentations instead of delivering a document. They show a presentation that has all the elements that we've been talking about, and they send the deck along afterwards for anyone who wants to peruse it more. So those are
It's more
some
visual
options.
than
Yeah.
more visual than the text-heavy approach that we've used in the past.
Yes. Very definitely. Very definitely.
Right.
So
One of the things that I find
these will
helpful
help with.
as well,
Oh, sorry.
yes, one of the things that I find helpful as well is to, and goes back to setting expectations and a time frame, is to make sure that the client knows what kind of time frame we're working with and what our goals are. So if we are hoping to get their draft report out within 1 week or 2 weeks, let them know so that we can work together to meet those deadlines as well.
Yeah.
I think that that's very, very helpful as well. And the other thing that I believe is very interesting and important to emphasize whenever possible is that if uh, management is able to take corrective action while this process is still ongoing, whether it's during field work or before the draft goes out, that we can make a notation in the report that this was already addressed. So that's another thing that I've used many, many times over the years, and I found management very receptive to that offer as well. So
I'm
exactly,
dangling the carrot. For those don't know what I'm
exactly,
doing, I'm dangling the carrot. Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely. So we can put things in a more positive light.
Indeed, indeed.
So what else should we know about report writing and making sure the report goes out with the right contents and so on?
Well, funny you should ask. I think in addition to timeliness, we need to look at persuasiveness. So is the writing itself as clear and concise as we can make it? I would say that that's part of it. I'll skip over surprises for a second. Positive tone, no auditor jargon. Let's minimize those three, those TLAs and FLAs. Those are 3-letter acronyms and 4-letter acronyms for anyone who's counting out there. It's also super, super important. No surprises and factually correct. These are vital. Again, relationship. If we're trying to build trust, we're trying to maintain a reputation of being a trusted business advisor, we absolutely need to make sure that we've got all our facts straight before an audit report goes out the door. So that objectivity that we talked about, and even the timeliness of our process is going to make the audit report more persuasive, funnily enough. Well-written, logical flow, all of these things enhance persuasion. I would say the
Yes.
bottom line is that last one, a convincing case or cases for change with identified benefits for making that change, for taking that corrective action.
And unfortunately, some auditors don't pay enough attention to that fact. They focus so much on the control that was not performed or the breakdown in the process or something along those lines that they always focus on the negative side of things. And of course, we need to highlight that, but it doesn't have to end there. We can definitely present the facts and highlight what needs improvement, but then highlight as well what's the positive side of it. What will be the benefit or the gain if we were to address those issues identified? So look at the upside as much as we can as well. We don't want to diminish the significance of issues, so be mindful about what message you're trying to convey and the tone you're trying to convey. But if you can leave things on a positive note, that's an important thing to also consider.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What else should we know about written reports?
Well, I thought it might be nice for us to share some report trends that we've seen at MIS Training Institute. Audit directors and managers symposia surveys tell us that 85% of audit organizations include the client responses with the report whenever feasible. Reports can be issued within 2 weeks of the closing conference without a management response. That's a really nice standard there, or a really nice objective
Goal?
there. Goal, objective, yes. And then the same group of people said that if they need a management response, it may take as long as 4 weeks. I guess that's not too bad, but I would argue for faster is better if we've done all those things that we talked about on the timeliness slide and the persuasiveness slide.
Right.
95% always issue a report. Now, remember, we're talking about people who do assurance engagements and consulting engagements. So we might be talking about all sorts of reports. And in some cases, the consulting engagement might not have a typical report. 92% always require a response. I find that interesting. I would have thought it would be closer to 100%, but that's still pretty high.
As you think about some organizations and some of the reviews that I've done over the years, and you're in banking as well, maybe this will apply. Again, it varies by organization, but in some of the reviews where you are doing kind of could be operational, but sometimes could be a compliance review. You come in, you review, you follow a really detailed script of what you need to check for, and you issue a report at the end. It's basically what you found as a result of your review. You come in on Monday, you're done on Friday. It's a very tactical review. And in some of those engagements that I've performed, there was not really a management response. You come in, you reviewed, you issue a report, and you move to the next location.
That makes
And then
sense.
management handles things offline. So not entirely surprised by that fact.
Yeah,
But
actually, now that you say that, branch audits, very, very similar back in the day for me. Same kind of thing. There would be a memorandum, but there wouldn't be a response. Yeah,
right.
it makes sense.
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, there's a few other things that our managers and directors mentioned at these symposia. They took these surveys. So let's take a look at the graphic again.
Mhm.
95% use recommendations, 79% use an executive summary. That is starting to, well, I'll hold off on saying what I was going to say for another moment. 80% believe reports do sell. So all of the things that we've been talking about in terms of persuasiveness and timeliness and balancing how it looks with what is said, it's having an effect, because I can tell you from earlier in my career that sometimes we really had to wrestle with whether or not management would accept our recommendations, and we're in a much better time than those old days, the old dark days. And the last one is 79% have reports that average 10 pages or less. So the reason I didn't talk about the third to last point here was I wanted to draw a relationship for our viewers, because I have had the benefit of seeing some of these surveys year over year. And executive summary percentage has been going down a little bit at a time. Now, 79% is still, that's more than 3/4. That is a sound, solid percentage. But
Right.
I would also point out to our viewers that the 79% on the last bullet point is going up. So that's been increasing, and the average page length in that grouping has been going down. So that suggests to me, now it's only anecdotal, but it suggests to me that a good proportion of our managers and directors are reporting out on their reports are getting briefer. And
Yes.
then perhaps those are the same folks who are not using an executive summary, or they're passing each other. That's what I meant to say. Is that so in a future year, we might see 79% of executive summaries going down a point or two, and 79% having shorter reports going up a page or up a point or two.
Right. Yes, I will agree with you. I believe that a big driver for having an executive summary is that legacy practice of having very long reports. and executives just not having the time to read
Mhm.
through 30, 40, 50-page reports. So as the reports get shorter, then the report becomes their report and it's executive in many respects. Another thing that I've seen quite often is also auditors adding an appendix or some other section to the document so that they provide the facts in a very concise way. And if any of the readers would like additional details, they can either look for the appendix or even request it. Sometimes not included in the report, but it's available. So if they want additional details, they can request it, but it's not distributed to everyone on the first pass through. So it also helps to reduce the length of the document.
Mhm.
So thank you very much, Kathleen. This was very helpful in understanding some of these qualitative aspects about the reports and the things that we need to make sure we keep in mind so that we can write them in a way that meets those qualitative attributes, that they are published timely, and that they are also going to be compelling and bring about positive change. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Hernan.
If you like this series, subscribe to the ACI Learning YouTube channel to enjoy more audit-related content.